In the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, unions were a fixture in this country. Unions were needed at one point because workers were beaten down. They worked long hours, they worked for very little pay, and often in hazardous conditions. But today is 2016. Things are different. At one point, the unions really did represent the workers. They cared for the workers. They wanted things better for the workers. But is that true today? To demonstrate how the unions have gone through a paradigm shift and union membership not even knowing it, I'm joined today by Doug Grima, a senior consultant with Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants and a former UAW local president. Doug started his career when he was just 18 years old. Still in high school, he signed his first union card. Doug eventually went on to serve as committee man, and later in his career he served as president at Local 174, one of the largest, if not the largest, amalgamated locals in the United States, and former home of Walter Reuther. During his journey, Doug witnessed some of the transformation for himself. Doug started with a union that he thought represented the workers, but as he became president, he started dealing directly with the politics. So today, Doug has agreed to share his story with us, and it is my hope that every manager, supervisor, human resource professional, owner of a company, president, CEO, or anybody that wants to know the truth about how unions have changed and how unions work today, sit back for the next 30 minutes and listen to Doug's story. My name's Bob Carroll, and this is today's episode of PSLabor Talk.
Welcome to PSLabor Talk. We're going to switch things up today a little bit. Rick Torres is in another part of the world working on employee relations one country at a time. So today I'm joined by Doug Grima, who is a former UAW local president. He's also a consultant with Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants. And today we're going to share his story and talk about some of the things he went through during his time with the union. So I'd like to welcome Doug Berman to the show. Doug, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Good to be here.
Good. So what I want to do today is kind of let our listeners get a glimpse into your life as you grew through the unions and some of the things you've seen from the union perspective throughout your career and what brought you here to the position that you hold now, which is a consultant on the management side. So for starters, let's talk about why you joined the union in the first place.
Well, back in the early 70s, I was still in school. And at that time, college was kind of out of the picture for me because I came from a larger family. So my father was a skilled tradesman for the big three, General Motors. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a skilled tradesman. And so back in 73, I actually had a cousin that could get me into General Motors when I turned 18 in March of 73. However, I was a co-op student still in high school, but I could only get in at that time. So what I did, my teachers allowed me to go and work and do my classwork at night, and my brother would take my work in to school for me. So I had to work day shift. They wouldn't allow me to work night shift. So I worked days at Detroit Diesels. In 73, I just turned 18 and did my schoolwork. And because at that time, the college students used to get hired into the big three for the summers, and they would lay them off after 89 days so they couldn't join the union. So what I did, I got my time in before they hired them in. And I ended up graduating from high school in June, and I actually got my 90 days to start my career at General Motors.
So you did what many people in our area here in Detroit did and followed in your father's footsteps and ended up in what many people in this area did. You ended up in the union by default, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, during that time, obviously back then times were different.
Much different. Much different.
So in the 70s, I would assume that the union, I hate to say it, but the union was actually probably helpful to you. But as you grew into a higher role. What kind of explain that? You grew in your career within the union ranks.
Sure. Yeah, the union was very helpful to me. I was a young guy, and they protected me, and I was not exactly the perfect worker. And but that's what the unions do. They protected the guy that wasn't the exact perfect worker. And I did create a stir at because I got very political at that time even. So I got my skilled trades apprenticeship when I was 20 years old, and then in '81 I actually became a journeyman machine repairman for General Motors, and I got political at that time. And I became assistant alternate committee man. I became a rep for the skilled trades department, and then I also became a chairman. I was elected chairman. I was elected committee man before that, and I really enjoyed it because a good friend of mine, was the president of a local, so I used to organize. I got into organizing at that time in the '80s, and it was quite a trip and quite an experience to find out the ins and out of organizing through the union. Through the '80s, I did this, and then come the early '90s, I was an employee assistant representative for the union at General Motors. Then I went back to school because it wasn't satisfying. I began to get bored, so I went back to school at Oakland University, got my bachelor's degree in political science and labor studies. And then in the early 2000s, I ran for president of my local 174, which is Walter Reuther's home local. I was a very proud member of that local. I did become president, beat the incumbent at that time. I had about 6,500 people that I represented with almost 100 different units. And 100 different units means 100 different contracts that I was responsible for. I did this. I spent hours. My weeks were 80 to 100 hours a week easily that I'd spend on a job. It was quite distressing at times, but things started falling apart, and I think we'll get more into it. But then I went back to school and got my master's degree and found out that I wanted to change courses.
So what you saw was back in 1973 a need for the union, and through a period of time, you had a kind of a change of heart.
Oh, absolutely. The union was like you mentioned earlier. The union was a good thing back in the 70s, but it started going downhill. That's when we started losing membership. You got to remember, back in the 70s, we had over 1.6 million members, and that was the height of the union, UAW at that time, and it just went totally downhill after that.
When did you start to notice it going downhill? So I guess to be more specific, you saw all these new laws enacted that we talk about. When you and I work together and we're working with a client, we talk about all these new laws and why the unions lost their relevance. But you've actually lived and seen how those laws impacted the workers and impacted the union's ability to organize, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said before, the unions were a good thing back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even the 60s. If it wasn't for the unions, we wouldn't have the health and safety laws on the book, the fair labor standards, 40-hour work week. These wouldn't be on the book. But the unions have lost their relevancy. Even through the 70s, I mean, I could really see it come early 80s, because these laws were there to protect workers already. So what did the union member need? Why would they need to be organized to have a committee man or a steward do things that they could do for themselves? So I seen the relevance of the union steadily decline.
So when you made reference that you were not the best of workers in the 70s. Back then, the union did have some teeth, but now things have changed, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. Back in the 70s, when I had been terminated from work from General Motors. We had a very strong working committee, shop committee, that I was told At the time, when they went in to fight my grievance, one of the shop steward actually put his 22 on the table, 22 pistol on the table when they were negotiating my grievance. I never failed when I was at Diesel's for a 3-year period. I never failed to not get paid for a disciplinary layoff, and I had plenty of them. Trust me. Well, the as I said before, and it's very true. 95 to 97% of the workers in a plant, in any particular plant, you'd never call a committee man, never have an issue, never call for the union. The 3 to 5% are the ones that usually use the union more than anybody.
Do you think the politics and you getting involved in the political aspects had something to do with you turning your own personal work ethic around?
Oh, absolutely, without question.
So you got elected to president at local
174.
And during your time as president, you've lived through some interesting ordeals.
Yes, it's quite a few.
Who was the president at that time of the union?
Let's see, it was Ron Gettelfinger was the president.
So you got to know Mr. Gettelfinger pretty well, huh?
Yeah.
So some of the stories that Doug has shared with me, we want to go through some of these stories to show exactly where the union's true stance is behind closed doors. And, we can talk about it all day long, but when you have somebody that lived it and felt the pressure of it talking to you, it makes all the difference in the world. I want to start by talking about one instance that you shared with me, just to show that everything is about money with the unions. We know that, you know that, I know that. The people we work with every day, they know that. But just to show you a story about how much money means to the union, you had an instance where the airline, the mechanical workers were on strike, correct?
That's correct.
And you wanted to provide some assistance to the strikers, and yes. You faced some backlash, some pretty serious backlash from the Solidarity House, correct?
That's correct.
Why don't you share that story?
Okay. Well, where the local was located, it was by the airport. It was by Detroit Metro Airport, Ram Van Born Road. And when the Northwest mechanics were taking a strike vote, the president of the mechanics workers came to see me. And he asked to see me, and we sat in my office. And he said, "Hey, look, Doug, we're having these meetings. We don't have a local union hall. However, we're having meetings, and we're renting ballrooms at the hotels by the airport, but it's costing $200-300 a time, which is no problem. We have money to do that. However, we'd rather give the money to the union hall, to another union. If we could rent your hall, we'd be more than happy to pay you." Well, I said there was no need for that. We're solidarity. It means brotherhood. And that's what I was always taught. As a union member, you are brothers. As policemen are brothers, union brothers. So I said, well, look, I got a schedule here because I have a lot of meetings. However, if you can fit your meetings in when I don't have any, the hall is yours. And I had quite a big hall. It could hold hundreds of people. And it fit their needs. And they wanted to pay me $200 to $300 every time they used it, and I refused to take the money. I said, "No, we're union brothers. I wouldn't do that." And they really wanted to pay. I actually asked them if they would just donate the money to maybe the Humane Society in the local's name. So said they would do that. Well, then the president said, of the mechanic workers said, "Look, I'm looking for a place to erect signs, strike signs." They wanted to build strike signs. So I took them out to the back of the local, and I had a huge parking lot, and I had a ravine halfway through the parking lot with another parking lot that we'd never used. I said, "Look, you guys are welcome to use that. You guys can stay there, build your signs, do whatever you want to do. Just keep it clean, the area clean, and I have no issue with that." And they thanked me, and things went on. And then it was an afternoon. A day and a half later, I get a phone call from the president's office down at Solidarity House. Ron Gettelfinger's on the phone for me. My secretary says, so I get on the phone, and President Gettelfinger says, "Grandma, what are you doing down there at that local?" I says, "Pardon me?" He says, what do I hear? Do I hear is true? What do I hear? That you're giving the mechanic, you're letting them rent the hall, the Northwest mechanic workers that are on strike. I says, oh, I'm not renting them the hall. He said, well, that's not what I heard. I says, no, I'm giving them the hall. And he says, you can't do that. I says, why can't I do that? He said, first of all, that local you're in the building belongs to International. I said, well, I pay the bills here. I think I have a right to do what I want, let anybody use it who wants to use it. So he says, you can't do this without our permission first, my permission, he said. I said, I need your permission to support brothers in a strike. He said, we're not supporting them as of yet. That's up to us to support them. I said, but aren't we all union brothers? And he says, that's not how it works. Then he got into the parking lot thing. He said, I hear about the parking lot you letting them use. I said, that's correct. I'm letting them use it. Well, he told me I had a day to tell them they couldn't use it anymore. I says, I no uncertain terms, I will never do that. And we got off to a very rocky start, me and President Gettelfinker, and he was not happy with me. And you know what? That's what solidarity is all about, is brotherhood. And that really started my mind, what we're all about here.
And you had told me that you were a union president that did what the union tries to sell the public on, and you would actually try to build relationships with management and work with the management and work with the workers that you represented to build a plan that works good for everybody. And that's what the unions try to sell the public on every day. But you found the reality of that real quick, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I did. We had like I said, we had almost 100 different units. At that time, there might have been a little over 80. And I had a staff that helped negotiate contracts and arbitrations. We had one small plant. It had 24 people in this plant. The owner of this plant called and said they got to reopen the contract because he's going to go out of business. He was losing money. And I says, well, let's look at your books. So we went and looked at the books, and sure enough, this guy was losing money hand over fist. But he was a very bad manager, and he had his family that were part of the management team too. And they really, the employees didn't trust this guy because he had cried wolf so many times. So what we had to do, we had to really talk the employees into reopening the contract. And that's a tough sell. However, because this guy couldn't pay the vacation pay that there was owed at the time. So I had to talk these guys, 24 of them, into reopening the contract. And I swore to them, I seen the books, you're not going to make it if we don't do this. Well, they weren't happy with me about this, and they weren't happy that they weren't going to get their vacation pay, but they agreed to reopen it. So we worked with the management, with the owner. We ended up getting rid of most of his family members, and my insistence was, if we're going to work together, then our 24 people, or you're going to hire more hourly people, and they're going to take over the ordering, and they're going to see what's ordered and the cost of everything if we're going to do this. And it was a hard sell, but we did it. The people in the plant ended up foregoing their 2 weeks vacation pay they had coming to do this, and they ended up getting a bonus at the end of the year because the plant turned around. And at this time, the plant is still in business, and they've doubled up their employees since then. And I got a lot of backlash, especially from my region, that's not how we do business. The union doesn't work like that.
But you saved 24 jobs. You worked to save the plant. Why did you get backlash?
They wanted me to walk away from it. Just walk away from 24 people, let the plant close. They said, it's not worth the time, effort, and money to put into this to make it work. That came from my region. And they said, 24 people, they can find other jobs. I said, I absolutely not a chance. Not a chance in hell was I going to do that. I was going to save those jobs, and I was going to make every effort to do that. And I can look myself in the mirror and say, at least I tried, even if they didn't make it.
Did you see that in other areas of the UAW around the country?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've seen that it's just amazing how much you see once you're involved into the politics. It's funny because, and it's not funny because at the time, back in 2004, 5, 6, there was $1 billion in a strike fund. $1 billion. Now that's membership money going into that. Now every convention we'd go to, I would attend. They would borrow money out of the strike fund to put into the general fund. Now, general fund is for overhead, for income, to pay reps. And they had a lot of overhead. They could not pay it out of the general fund because they weren't getting enough dues money, so they had to borrow out of the strike fund to do this. Well, how do you go from $1 billion to 5 or 6 years later, 7 years later, to under $500 million without a major strike?
Speaking of strikes, you got experience with strikes too, don't you?
I do.
And why don't you walk us through that? Tell me and the listeners what it's like for a president to walk workers on strike, and you have one that lasted over a year that I know of.
Yep.
You said you look yourself in the mirror. How do you look yourself in the mirror after walking those people out for over a year?
That was tough. It was actually about a 1.5-year strike. It was a Hercules drawn steel. They made good wages. The father had started the company and was a decent guy, was a decent employer. He paid his employees well. They got bonuses. Everything was going well. Well, Dad decided he wanted to retire, so he was going to hand it over to his 2 sons, who never worked a day in their life, who more or less had a silver spoon in their mouth. They took over the plant, and they would brag that they actually were making money hand over fist, and they had other plants that were non-union, but the union plant was making actually more money than the non-union plants. So contract time comes, the guys want a little bit more piece of the pie, a bigger piece. Well, the 2 brothers decided to take a hardline stand. They wanted to lock us out. We went and took a strike vote. We went on strike, and after almost 2 weeks, not quite 2 weeks into the strike, I get a phone call. My secretary comes to me. I was meeting with a member, and she said, you have an important phone call. I says, okay, after I'm done with this member. Said, well, you don't understand, it's President Gettelfinger. I said, well, just as any other member, this member, I'm with the member right now, and I'm going to take care of my business. And when I'm done, I will speak to him. Well, it was about 20 minutes later, my secretary, I went back in the office, and my secretary calls Gettelfinger's office. He gets on the phone, President Gettelfinger, and of course his first words out of his mouth are, Grandma, what are you doing down there at that there local?
He said that to you a lot, huh?
Oh yeah, he did. We didn't exactly see eye to eye. And I said, well, and he mentioned Hercules. He said, what's going on there? He said, you can't keep these people out. He says, I want you to put them back to work. I said, well, you know what? We can't get a contract here. They won't, we're locked out right now anyway, so we can't even get a contract. He said, I don't care. He said, you have them back to work by next week, the following Monday, which was early in the week, the prior week, and or I'm cutting them off of strike pay. Well, understand, these guys were getting $200 a week in strike pay. $200 out of the strike fund that their money, their union dues go into. Well, I said, how can you, in good conscience, do this? You can't do this to almost 200 members that are counting on a measly $200 a week. He said, I can do whatever I want to do. Well, this didn't set well with me personally. And I said this wasn't going to happen. And I took steps. I had to come up with something quickly, and I had friends down at the news station, one of the news stations here in Detroit, and he had run a couple stories for me, and I had helped him out on previous items that he needed. He agreed to do a piece saying that Gettelfinger was going to cut him off of strike pay, and he was going to run that piece. and that's bad publicity for UAW. They don't want bad publicity. So I told them to hold off on it, to give me a few days, and I leaked that downtown through a couple of my sources, and I got another phone call from Mr. Gettlefinger calling me a lot of things that I can't mention right here, and I would not like to mention, but I did get my way. I did get my way. However, my relationship was even worse after that, and we kept them out for almost a year and a half.
People actually died on that strike line, didn't they?
Yeah, I had a gentleman come into my office. He was 62 at the time, and I had these guys get part-time jobs, so they had to march the picket line to get their $200, so many hours. And I had a 62-year-old come into my office, and he was in tears. And he told me, he said, "Look, Doug," he says, "I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. I can't find a job." So I took my own money, and I paid his car payments. I just said, "Please don't say nothing. I can't afford to do this for everybody." And I helped him through attorneys to save his house. And it was tough because I actually had people. I had suicide from the employees that just couldn't do it anymore. I had families that broke up, that lost their homes. I just seen the evil part of this strike. It was devastating. You're not supposed to take it personally, but you know what? I got a heart just like everybody else, and it really hit me hard. And that strike just turned my stomach, and turned my stomach against the union.
And when you went on that strike, how long did you think it would last?
Oh gosh, I really believed it wouldn't last more than 2, 3, 4 weeks at the time. I really didn't. Usually strikes aren't that long. Especially this plant was doing real well, but then we found out that they were stockpiling a lot of stuff. They had a warehouse that they had, and we found out it was several miles from the plant, and they were stockpiling, so they had quite a bit of material.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So you went from being a screw up to being a leader. Right? Yeah. That's pretty much sum up your journey?
Yeah, it's been a wild journey. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I've had a lot of good times, a lot of low times in my life, especially in my union life. I've seen a lot of things. I've done a lot of things that probably I wasn't proud of. But now I can look myself in the mirror, and I'm very happy at where I'm at.
And that's what brought you to this side.
Oh, absolutely, without question. As I've told Bob, we've had this discussion I've had with Rick several years back. I've had people tell me, "How do you go from 30-some years in the union to all of a sudden flipping sides?" In fact, when I was in a job, I had an owner of a company say that to me. And I said, "I understand what you're saying." He didn't believe that I could do it. I said, "Look," I said, "there's no need." The companies back in the 40s, 50s, employers were rotten. Let's just face it, employers asked for what they got.
They beat the crap out of people.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not 2016.
Right. But employers are totally different today. They're willing to work with their employees, and I think that's why employees deserve the choice. They have the choice. I don't tell them, "Don't be a union member, don't vote for the union." I says, "You know what? You vote the way you want to vote. However, you know what? Why pay somebody $50, $60, $70, $80 a month plus initiation fees to do things that you can do for yourself? Why not? Let's bridge the gap. We don't need a union, a third party coming in here." So that's why I joined with PSLC.
And as a former union president, you can honestly say they can do it for themselves.
Oh, absolutely, without question. I mean, it was all about numbers. Trust me.
You kind of worked yourself out of a job, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I most certainly did, Bob.
Well, that's it for today's episode of PSLabor Talk. Doug, I want to thank you for coming in, sharing a personal glimpse into your life and what some of the things that took you from your position of a screw-up to a leader in the union and bringing you on to our side here, supporting management.
It's been a pleasure, Bob.
Thank you. And for everybody out there, I hope that you can take something from this. The unions had their position. They had their stay of course at one time. And unfortunately for them, that's not necessary today. Management simply just has to do the right thing, listen to their employees, practice good employee relations. There's laws on the books that provide the protections that the unions once provided. And as long as companies are doing the right thing and being proactive with their employees, Doug, I'm sure you'll agree, they really don't have much to worry about with the union because they have a firewall built between them and the union by doing that, correct?
Oh, without question, Bob, without question.
Doug, I want to thank you for coming in today. It just shows how far we've come since 1973. And things aren't going to change. We're just, even though the National Labor Relations Board is leaning towards the union, that's not permanent, and good employee relations is permanent.
I couldn't have said any better, Bob.
Okay. My name's Bob Carroll. I want to thank everybody for listening to this edition of PS Labor Talk, and we'll see you next time.